Hi, it's Mark Owen from Moose Marketing and PR, the editor of Punchline Magazine, and welcome to Punchline Talks, the business breakfast briefers. I've got a fantastic panel of guests this morning where we're going to go over the newspapers. We're going to find out what's happening in their local business sectors, their own individual businesses, and finally, what's caught their eye in this week's Punchline. So let me introduce to the panel. We've got David Jackson, Managing Director of Marketing Cheltenham. We've got Emily MacKenzie, the Chapter Steward and Chief Operating Officer for Gloucester Cathedral. Will Abbott, Partner and Head of Business Advisory at the lovely people at Randall Payne. And finally, not least, Neill Ricketts, CEO of Versarien, Advanced Engineering Group, a man that is all things graphene. You name it, he's putting it into everything. Clothes, concrete, your cereal, probably sprinkles it everywhere. Anyway, let's talk about the papers very, very quickly. I'm going to run through them. The Western Daily Press. West shortlisted for nuclear fusion sites, a story that we ran yesterday. The Citizen newspaper. Burglar 45 caught by CCTV and DNA. The Eye, half-term holidays boosted by cheap tests. The Times, Xi expected to snub UK summit on climate crisis. The Guardian, GPs face-to-face appointments plan could lead to exodus of doctors. Let's be honest, no one can see a doctor anymore. The Queen, this is a good one on the Daily Express. Wonder statins cut risk of dying from COVID. Who knew? I take a mouthful of these every single day. The Daily Mail, Queen's green anger, criticising our world leaders. The Daily Telegraph, unions holding Christmas hostage. That's not a big surprise, is it? They're going to come out and block our roads or not turn up. The Sun, Her Majesty the Green. There's a theme going now with the red tops. Green Queen, says the Daily Mirror. And finally, the Daily Star, who's put his big foot in it again? Yeti found in Marbs. Yes, it's Boris Johnson on holiday. Right, guys, anyway, thanks ever so much for joining us this morning. Let's move over straight away to Emily. Thanks, Emily, for the first time appearing on the show. What have you picked out the papers, please?
Right, thank you, Mark. So I've actually gone for two environmental stories. We'll take the Telegraph first, and there's a story there about households pushed to scrap gas boilers with £5,000 grant. So this is the government saying that if you decide to move over to a heat pump type boiler, they will give you a £5,000 grant towards it. Heat pumps generally cost about 10,000, so this is still a significant expenditure for households. And of course, I believe a normal sort of gas boiler, you're looking at more kind of 2,000 to 3,000. So these are big costs. The government have been keen to say that although I believe gas boilers won't be available from 2035, they're not expecting people to move over to these different types of boilers earlier if their gas boilers aren't giving out. But the idea is to try and get early adopters. All of this worries me a bit because heat pumps, I don't think the technology is good enough yet, particularly for a lot of our older housing stock, because let's face it, in Britain, there's a lot of Victorian and older properties. And then when I think about the cathedral, so we've got a property portfolio of about 60 properties. They're all listed properties. Some of them are really old. Some of them have, medieval foundations and what have you. And actually, the exemptions in terms of getting planning permissions for things like heat pumps don't apply to listed buildings. So you've got some real difficulties, I think, coming down the line here, where one side of government is saying, go green, buy these projects, here's a grant towards it. And the other side of lawmaking saying, no, don't, you've got to get planning permission, you've got to do this, you've got to protect ancient structures, etc., etc. So I think it's interesting, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this coming up.
And it's funny, in Scandinavian countries, they've been doing this forever. My friend's lived in Sweden for 30 odd years. They've been doing it, well, since he's lived there. And of course, Gloucester College have just boring 40 holes into the ground to do this as well. But you're right, it's a problem coming down the tracks, isn't it?
It's definitely a problem, yes. And I think, say, for people in flats as well, where they perhaps got leasehold in flats, it's not as simple as just being able to replace your own boiler with a heat pump type boiler. So I just think we're there's a lot of talk at the moment, but we need to, society needs to sort of catch up, and some new technologies need to come through, and often forcing these things doesn't work. It needs good technology people will want to adopt because it works. Bad technology people don't want. So
great stuff, great story.
Yeah. And then the other one, so I don't normally read it, but the Daily Star. And
I read the Daily Star. It's a great paper.
Well, actually, it's been quite interesting. So it's a story that has run and run, but it's got a slightly new angle today. And that's about, they've called it Tarquin's Call Halt to Chaos. And this is to do with the Insulate Britain guys who've been blocking the motorways, etc., etc. And I believe they've written a letter saying, they've been very generous, saying they're going to stop this action for a number of days. So we can all be very grateful for that. I liked the Star's headline with Tarquins, because obviously here they're poking fun. They're saying that it's the sort of better off professional middle classes, people who don't need perhaps to earn money for a living, etc., who've got the time to go and glue themselves to a motorway or cause chaos. And we've all watched this over the last couple of weeks. I think we've all felt the pain of those drivers, because let's face it, nobody drives on the M25 for fun. Nobody's out there just for a jolly. They're out on the M25 because they've got to get somewhere. They've got to get to work, they've got to get to hospital, they've got to take a child somewhere, whatever it is. And these people have caused chaos. And I think it's actually probably putting people off insulating their homes. So I thought that was another interesting story on the green angle.
Great start, Emily. Totally agree. So very, very quickly to the panel. Guys, should these guys be locked up? Neill?
Why do you always ask me these questions, Mark?
Well, like controversial. What? Just answer yes or no if you like.
Damned if I do, damned if I don't. I agree with what they're trying to say. I don't agree with the way that they're trying to do it. And there are people that actually do travel on the M25, Emily, for pleasure, but very few of them, including me. But I think it's we've got to be more sensible about doing this. There is a climate crisis. We do need to take action. At what point do we all start gluing ourselves to the road in order to get people to understand that we're in real trouble here?
And the glue, isn't that environmentally friendly, apparently? Will, what do you reckon?
Well, what he said, I suppose. I think it is. Most of the people sat in the M25 are trying to get to a job, aren't they? Do a day of work, earn some money, pay the mortgage, all those other things. And I suspect most of the people in those cars are very sympathetic with the cause. In terms of, I think we all realise that climate change is real and we have to do something about it, and we have to do something about it now. So, I think again, the cause is grand. The method probably is flawed.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dave.
Yeah, well, I agree. Yeah, same as Emily says. The danger is that the protests are actually going to push people in the other direction and probably force people away from, or feeling the stigma almost of sort of going along with home insulation or whatever their sort of measures might be. So I agree with the cause, but the mechanism, if you like, is clearly sort of forcing people away from it, I think.
It's flawed, isn't it? Thanks very much, guys. Okay, Will, let's move to you then, sir. What have you got in the papers, please? Or paper?
Well, paper. So yes, I allowed to say this is my favourite paper, The Times, which I read every day over breakfast. And I went through it this morning to see what stories I could pick out about technology. So once you get past all the empty shelf stuff and the lack of lorry drivers and there's going to be no Christmas and all that other stuff, there's quite a few stories dotted throughout the paper about different technology. The first one that caught my eye was car makers are going to ditch the internal combustion engine way before the government's target of 2035, apparently, which I think is quite interesting, almost back to Emily's point. Actually, the government sets the legislation, the government makes all these rules, but ultimately it's the businesses and the people that are going to make it happen. The government can force these things to happen, but the feeling is that actually there's so much money now invested in the new technology, electric cars, hydrogen, etc., that we won't be driving internal combustion engines very much longer, which I thought was really interesting. Allied to the car theme, apparently there's now so many self-driving cars being tested in San Francisco overnight, they're forming their own traffic jams, which I thought was slightly ironic. So the local residents are complaining about the noise of all these vehicles driving around San Francisco overnight, testing self-driving, which I thought was quite interesting. So there's self-driving on the way. The next one definitely made me smile. The scientists have worked out the best way to get Wi-Fi on the moon. So the number one problem with sending people to the moon isn't food or shelter. It's, can we just make sure we've got Wi-Fi before we get there? And the other thing that made me smile about this story was they worked out that it's better to have 24 poles with a router on than it is to have just one.
Well, I'd like
And
to
how
know-
much money they spent working that out.
You can't get Wi-Fi in the centre of the city, let alone anything else. It's bonkers, isn't it?
There is actually the part of the story was that they've been to a city, I think it was Cleveland or somewhere, Ohio in America, where they also have real problems with Wi-Fi. So they were trying to work out how to get Wi-Fi in this city. And that would work on the moon. Yeah, interesting. A sports story. Lots of talk about players heading the ball in football and that causing Alzheimer's and all sorts of problems in later life. So they've now developed a system where they can train footballers to head the ball using virtual reality. And Tony Cascarino, who some of you will know was a very good header of the ball in his day, has been along and tried this in training. He said, actually, you know what, I was very skeptical about this, but it actually works. So actually virtual reality. You look like you were a highly trained sportsman at one time, Mark.
Well, of course, yeah.
And then the final story I picked up was you'll be all be pleased to hear, talking about roadblocks and environmental process, that Boudica was actually yesterday, she was acquitted of terrorism in the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And you all started thinking, what's that all about? So actually, to be fair, for a 2,000-year-old lady, she looked quite well stood up in the Supreme Court. But this is a campaign, this is obviously a moot trial. This is a campaign by an organisation called Classics for All, which is to try and reverse the decline in the teaching of classics at school. So they're very keen that we continue to teach classics. It's a subject close to my wife's heart, as she qualified with a master's in classics about 2 years ago through the Open University. My question leading off the back of that, though, when we're talking about technology and the lack of people going into science, the STEM subjects in particular, it's kind of interesting that there's still people suggesting we also need to be not to forget about the classics. I haven't really thought that debate through too much myself, but I think it's an interesting angle. Actually, we mustn't lose sight of some of these other subjects, history, the classics, etc., and just purely focus on science. Very
good. Thanks ever so much. Well, brilliant array of stories there. I'm going to move to David now. David, what have you picked out for us, please?
Yeah, well, I suppose a sort of linked story in some ways. I hadn't really thought about it that way in the first instance, but in the Times there's a piece about buses actually, and coming back to the sort of environmental theme and travel, etc. And our Stagecoach and obviously National Express, with their potential takeover at the moment, are reporting that levels of patronage on buses and sort of those sort of commuter buses almost is back up to around 76% of levels pre-COVID, which that's quite surprising actually. But obviously it plays on that theme of actually, electric cars aren't necessarily the entire answer. Actually, it's about modal shift and about getting more people off the roads actually, or at least into kind of mass transit, if you like. So that's an encouraging story. But then equally the other side of it, in my interest as sort of visitor economy, if you like, is the fact that actually only about 50% of people are returning to coach travel, which is, obviously, the cliche of the sort of granny coming on coach holidays and all the rest of it. But it has a serious side to it. I mean, as we know here in Cheltenham in particular, whilst there's been a boom of staycation and lots of couples and families going on holiday, actually what the hotels and a lot of the tourism businesses rely on is that base business of either overseas or coach travel or people that come midweek. And that's the sort of foundations of a lot of their businesses. And, that hasn't returned yet. And, we know that for a fact here in Cheltenham, we're probably, again, around half of what the value was pre-COVID in terms of value of visitor numbers. So, an important story, I think, that, hopefully as we go into 2022, we'll start to recover and we'll see that modal shift as well going onto buses all the more, and hopefully with the commitments we've got from the likes of Stagecoach, but continued through in the National Express of, shifting to electric buses as well, which would be great to see. So that's one sort of linked story. I guess on a sort of, also sort of semi sort of visitor economy tourism related. So in the Guardian this morning, and this picks up partly on a story that you ran earlier in the week, Mark, on closure of our traditional pubs and restaurants and small businesses, lost 10,000 in the last year, which is incredible. I think is incredible statistic. But a nice story in the Guardian from the most remote pub in mainland Britain, on the Knoydart Peninsula in the west of Scotland, the Old Forge, which is now being gifted back to the community with a grant of £500,000 to continue it as a community pub, which it just rang bells with me, because I've spent a number of years living out on probably one of the remotest parts of non-mainland Britain on the Isles of Scilly, and I know full well how important those rural pubs and isolated pubs are. So I've spent many a time in the Turk's Head on St Agnes and Sevenstones on St Martin's, and places out 28 miles into the Atlantic. So that's a sort of an encouraging story, but off the back of a really, a sort of disheartening story really around the number of closures that we've seen in the last 12-18 months. And then sort of separately, but again slightly linked, is the story around, again in the Times this morning, I think, which is running a similar story that's around, I think, in the Daily Mail, about the potential delay to the overhaul of the business rate system, which is obviously a major challenge to the retail sector, pubs, restaurants, etc., which is long awaited. I think 2-3 years now in the waiting for this overhaul. And the worry is that, well, is it going to come too late for so many businesses? I know that the retail experts are saying, well, actually, it could be that we lose 80% of our retail trade before that's actually come through. So, but the other thing I think, particularly for Cheltenham, that people perhaps don't realise is that, people walk along the promenade and think, well, there's a lot of vacant units here. Why aren't anybody doing anything about it? What people don't realise is that a lot of buildings in Cheltenham are listed, and listed buildings, they don't pay business rates. So those landlords can quite happily sit without any tenants, because they know they're actually not paying any business rates, and there's no incentive for them necessarily to secure those tenants, particularly with the kind of deals that are being made with retailers at the moment, where perhaps business rates or rents are being not paid. So, it's an interesting story, which let's hope that it comes to fruition sooner rather than later to try and support our retail trade and town centres.
Yeah, something the government's been sitting around doing nothing about for a long time, isn't it? No, great bunch of stories there. Thanks ever so much for that, David. Neil, let's move over to you. Last but never least, sir. Okay,
feel a bit like tail end Charlie here, but I've done you proud. I've got a bag full of papers here. Right, we're going to have a quick whistle through here. I always think that it's quantity over quality as far as these stories are concerned. So, picked up on the story about the Queen identifying her frustration with the leaders around the climate crisis. I feel that we're just too slow at the moment. We need to acknowledge what the problem is, come up with the fixes. The breakup, a little mix there. We've had the rush for fuel, and now it looks like we're going to have a rush for toys. I'm sat here whittling away some willow for some toys for my kids. But what are they going to do at Christmas when Father Christmas comes and there's a real shortage? Is it true? Is it not true? Not Father Christmas. I meant the shortage of presents. Adele's got a new song out today, one of my favourites. And the question is, Mark, do you feel lucky? Because tonight is a £186 million lottery, and I'm hoping that if I was lucky enough to win, I'd give you the £2.50 back. Okay. On to The Citizen. Dale Vince a few years ago was regarded as a complete crazy person, as I have been before as well. But all the things that he's been working on for the last few years are all now really pertinent. Veganism, alternative energy, our e-scooters, the curse of the nation, or the solution to commuter traffic. 5-hour delay on the M5 due to a hole in the tarmac, and I know a great graphene company that may have a solution to that we're working on at the moment. I did have a look through the planning apps, nothing in there, Mark, for your mansion, and that led me on to the Forester. Versarien, worst in the country for EV. Very disappointing for me as an EV evangelist. The launch of the new growth hub. Fantastic that. Although obviously Drybrook is my favourite, Cinderford is top of the league at the moment, having 100% victory. And the big biosphere application which has gone in, of which we're asking people to really tell us about how they want the forest to look in the future. I won't talk about the FT because it was very depressing, except for cybersecurity. And Prince William has got to be in his bonnet that we're all going to space. But given all the crisis that's going on, I think we'll spend more money in space and less money in the UK. So anyway, there we go, Mark.
Well, that's a fantastic run through. I just want to show you this as well. This is in the Sun, where where they're saying there's going to be a shortage of toys this Christmas. And it's a bit like the Quality Street story and any other kind of story. The run on the petrol, I do think that was all fed by the media. But anyway, moving on. Emily, let's come back over to you. Thanks ever so much for that, Neill. Fantastic. Emily, your role in the Gloucester Cathedral, okay, it must have been really, really difficult financially for the cathedral during the lockdown. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please, and a little bit about your role in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So my role is effectively managing all the business functions of the cathedral. This includes generating the income to keep us going and making sure we've got the right resources and people, and that we can deliver against our mission, etc. Obviously, we've got a wonderful team of clergy who manage all of that side of things, and music and all the beautiful things that happen at the cathedral. So I'm a bit more of the nuts and bolts operational type of person. We've got a staff team of about 75. We've got about 450 volunteers. In a normal year with tourism, we have maybe 450,000 visitors over the door, across the threshold. So visitor income is a massive stream of income for us. And of course, during lockdown, as David would know, that completely disappeared for many months over the last 18 months. So it's been really difficult for us, but it's been difficult for lots of organisations. We were very lucky that we ran a fundraising campaign last year called the Beacon of Hope, and we raised £1 million, and that has thankfully seen us through and meant we've been able to keep going all of the sort of social outreach projects that we do, like our breakfast club for the homeless and working with people with wellbeing and mental health issues and that kind of thing. So it's been an interesting period. I don't know what David thinks about this, but over the summer we got back up to about 80% footfall for our visitors. A different demographic, a lot of staycationers, as David said. Really lovely to see lots of local people. So there's lots of people in Cheltenham, for example, that haven't been to Gloucester Cathedral or Stroud or the Forest or whatever, and they made the effort to come over. And we did a lot of stuff for children over the summer. I don't know if you saw, but there were medals if you got a certain number of spotted a certain number of things, and it was really lovely to see families, so many families at the cathedral. But that said, we look forward to welcoming back tourism, international tourism, and our visitors from overseas in the future. That would be great as well. It'd be really lovely to get back to normal.
It's funny, when I've been back to the cathedral, and it's funny how people have something iconic or magnificent on their doorstep, and yet they don't visit it. And I urge anybody who hasn't been to the Gloucester Cathedral for some time to go there. It really is quite amazing. And I'm assuming that Harry Potter, wearing my marketing hat, and David here from Marketing Cheltenham, Harry Potter must have a big part to play in tourism as well now, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. A lot of people come because of the Harry Potter link, or indeed some of the other films that have happened, Doctor Who and Wolf Hall and all sorts of things that have happened at the cathedral. Interesting that Warner Brothers are quite restrictive in what we can do in terms of marketing with Harry Potter.
Funny that.
Yeah, but that said, we do get a lot of Harry Potter fans, and there's lots to see. The cloisters are just fantastic for any Harry Potter fan. You get transported straight over into the films and the books.
I'd tell you one other last thing. My wife and her friends have discovered the cafe there as well in Gloucester Cathedral. Magnificent array of cakes, and I highly recommend it. Anyway, thank you ever so much for that.
Thank you.
Really lovely for you to join us. Right, Will, I'm going to move over to you, sir. Okay, you're the business expert for Randall Payne of Business Advisory. What's it been like for you for the last sort of 6 months, and what's sort of happening? What's the sort of feedback for the business community at the moment as we come out of COVID?
I think the one thing that nobody will be surprised about is that just about all the businesses I work with are trying to recruit, and I think it's just that it's a real conundrum in terms of there simply doesn't appear to be enough people to do the work that we've got. So this is where technology is starting to come into play, of course, but that's the biggest challenge I see people facing at the moment. I think the economy is starting to pick up, so people are busy. As I say, it's more a question of trying to get the work done. In terms of our business, again, it's the same thing. We're picking up clients at a pretty rapid rate at the moment. I think people are, part of that is driven by lifestyle choices. So I think people are now saying, actually, where they're sat at home doing their own bookkeeping or whatever else, they're now saying, actually, I'd rather spend that time doing other things that I enjoy a lot more. So they're coming over to us. I think they also realise that there is some risk and uncertainty about, so that they want more robust financial reporting. They need to know the numbers are right. They need to know they're getting the right support. So I think those things are all positives for us. And the technology, I started talking about technology. I think the big change there with the technology, the cloud-based stuff, is that it makes it so much more cost effective and efficient time wise to produce things like forecasts and cash flows and all those stuff that's so essential to the business. Because we can produce that more effectively and efficiently, we can spend more time talking to the clients about what it means and what they need to do to change it if they're not hitting budgets, etc., what the consequences are a couple of months down the line in terms of cash flow, and actually what we can do to change that now. So I think for us it's really interesting. I think that the one thing that the pandemic did change, which was something I was trying to get clients to adopt for a while, was actually these type of Zoom video calls. So the days of traveling to meetings, I think people now realize that this stuff works. So actually it's much easier to get hold of people much more quickly, get on a call. If there's a problem, get on a call straight away. Don't wait for a meeting.
No, I totally agree, Will. We're kind of running out of short, and I know that Neill has to go and do the school run, and I know David's got to do the school run as well. Thanks ever so much, Will. Neill, before you run off, what's happening with graphene? You've recently, Diane Savory has become the chairperson for Versarien. That's a bit of a coup.
That was my punchline story. You can't go and steal my story. I think you do this every time, Mark. Every time I have a story lined up on the street, ready to go, you go and blow it.
You can't pick your own story every week, mate.
Well, that's not in the rules.
Anyway, Diane, let's go back.
Fantastic appointment. I'll talk to you at a later stage about Diane joining the company. If she thought G1st was a challenge, she's got nothing compared to the challenge of bringing graphene to everything in the world, to everybody. Which is what our mission is. We're there to work on eco-friendly projects, including graphene in concrete, graphene in roads, graphene in textiles.
Emily doesn't know what graphene is, mate, so I'm very sorry.
So it's dead easy. Imagine like black talcum powder, but it was isolated by a couple of Russian professors in 2005. It's a single atom thick material, quantum science. I won't bore you with all the details, but I've got a fantastic book here. So anybody who would like a copy and to learn more about graphene, please contact Mark, and Mark will forward you on to me, because Mark's got nothing to do, because it's not his fire engine station house thing. So anyway, if you want to know about graphene, please let me know, and I'll send out a copy of our book. We're trying to educate everybody about the benefits of graphene, especially as far as the environment is concerned.
Fantastic. So
I just wanted to make the point, actually. I'm with Will. We should do more of these Zoom calls, but I'm getting frustrated by people always booking in meetings, traveling 200 miles for an hour meeting. It's bonkers to me, and we haven't changed them. I honestly believe we haven't changed the mentality of people, and I don't think we'll start changing the mentality of people until we start taxing by the mile for traveling by car. Especially internal combustion engines. I love internal combustion engines. I'm a petrol head by nature, but how much time are we wasting going to meetings that we don't really need to? If you think about this meeting 2 years ago, we'd have all travelled to your fire station in Gloucester, and we'd have blown 3 hours doing a 20-minute call.
We got a good breakfast when we got there, though, Neil, to be fair, wouldn't we? Mark with a laid on a cooked breakfast for all of us.
I would have done it myself. I've
never had a cooked breakfast.
I think things have changed, Neil. I mean, I know people that used to go up to London once, twice, 3 times a week for a meeting. That's just not happening now. It's all happening on Zoom. So I'm with Will. I think times have changed, and for the better in that respect.
Yeah, I just wonder about the quantum, whether or not there's enough people changed, and whether or not we're getting back in. The mood music in all the papers is, COVID's gone. Let's worry about this new flu that we've got coming through, and looks very, very similar to COVID, but we're not calling it COVID. And we're reverting back to type, which is let's go and have a meeting 200 miles away.
Look, it's a very nice link to roads, because I know recently that they put graphene into tarmac and put it on a stretch of road near Manchester, isn't it? Do you just want to tell us a little bit about that? Because that's a very, very exciting proposition, what we're talking about here.
I do worry about not only your fashion choices, but also your geographical knowledge, because it's on the A1M, which I suppose is somewhere near Manchester. But yeah, what a great story for graphene in general. Can't talk too much about it because it's a Manchester geek project. I know you're dying to find out more details. But in that particular instance, from what I understand, it's a way of being able to recycle the asphalt that's normally taken away and to relay it using graphene to give it some of the properties that it would have had as a virgin material. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of our developments, is all about sustainability, looking at new ways of doing things. And that goes from everything from 3D printing houses to the concrete.
And also the clothes as well. Last time we spoke, you were wearing a very tight top made of graphene. How things are moving on that front?
Yep, we've been working with the University of Gloucestershire. We've got some fantastic test results. We're kind of understanding how this new science works. And yeah, really positive test results. So textiles is something I haven't talked about. Packaging I haven't talked about. Tires I haven't talked about. You know, life in the Ricketts house at the moment is pretty chaotic and busy. And long may it continue. And let's take on some of these really big challenges. Okay, thanks very much. Do you want to pick out your story for Punchline Talks, just in case you have to go? Well, I was going to go with a new role for former G1st LEP LEP chair, but since you've blown that one, I'll go for the Barclay's been shortlisted for the fusion energy plant, which I think after we got through the fuel crisis and the toy crisis and the custard cream crisis, I think the next thing that we've really got to worry about is sustainable energy and making sure we don't get into blackouts. So for me, I think that's a positive thing. Is it the right thing? I'm not 100% sure, but you know, at least we're getting on with something. So that's my view anyway. Okay, no, fantastic. It could be done there in Barclay. David, let's go over to you then, please. Cheltenham, some big news coming out about what you've got planned for Christmas, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, front page of the Echo this week, obviously, with the lot of news about the lights and sort of investment in that over the next 5 years, which is, you know, very welcome in terms of you know, creating a reason to come to Cheltenham over the Christmas period. We know how critical Christmas trading months and weeks are. So, and then, yeah, last night, for those of you, I know it wasn't necessarily covered in the planning sections of the papers this week, but it was a bumper planning committee last night with at CBC, and one of which was to grant planning permission for our ice rink, which for those of you, I mean, I've only been in Cheltenham for a couple of years, but everybody I ever speak to in Cheltenham is, whenever you mention an ice rink, it's like, oh yeah, you know, come again. You know, you've been saying that for 10 years and it's never happened. It's never going to happen. So I can finally give you an exclusive, Mark, and say that the ice rink will be happening. It will be running from the 18th of November to the 2nd of January on Imperial Gardens. So very much a hark back to the Winter Gardens for those of you around in the 1870s, when the ice rink was there back in its heyday. So yeah, we're really excited about that. That's going to be a real sort of centerpiece to Christmas in Cheltenham, along with the lights, along with an extended Christmas market, new operators on all of those things this year. So, you know, all credit really to both the Cheltenham bid, but also Cheltenham Borough Council, who are really, you know, they're stumping up the cash on this and, you know, kind of taking a massive risk on the kind of investment that it takes to run an ice rink, which is not inconsiderable, I can tell you. And you know, all about driving footfall and encouraging people back into the town. You know, when it's been a pretty challenging 18 months and a pretty rubbish Christmas last year, as we all know. So, you know, hopefully it does the trick, and, you know, both for community as well as businesses, it really brings people back into the town.
I know it's very, very early, and thanks ever so much for the exclusive, but any idea how much a ticket would cost?
It ranges. I mean, I know that's a bit of a poor answer, but I mean, you can get a family ticket for anything from 20 quid for a family of 4, up to, if you want to come ice skating on Christmas Eve, for example, then it's going to be closer to I think 36, 40 pounds, something like that. So it ranges as you would expect across the sort of months and as you get close to Christmas. But we're trying to make it as affordable and accessible to everybody as we can. We're doing making sure we've got arrangements there with people like No Child Left Behind and children on free school meals, that sort of thing, that they can get tickets. So yeah, we're trying to make it as inclusive and accessible as possible.
I think it's fantastic. The nice thing about the ice rink, it really gives that sort of Christmas feel, doesn't it? You know, that we used to have it in Gloucester down by the fair. We used to have King Square first of all, and then it moved over to the Quays, and it really just, with the music and just a fantastic atmosphere. You must be very excited yourself then, David.
Yeah, no, it's the sort of, we've been waiting for yesterday for a long time because we've not been able to kind of shout about it, but there's been lots of work going on behind the scenes, as you can well imagine. But yeah, no, it's exciting. I mean, it's a great project to work on. It's nice to finally kind of have something to really celebrate and kind of be excited about for Cheltenham and bringing people into the town. So yeah, a lot of tickets now to sell. So we'll be talking to you in due course as well, Mark, about that, I'm sure, to try and get some more promotion on it. But yeah, exciting, really is.
No, and I'd just like a big shout out, actually, Cheltenham Borough Council, because sometimes we all, in business, we kick our council sometimes. We're always moaning about planning and we're moaning about this, that. But fair play to Cheltenham Borough Council. They seem to be working really hard to work with the business community, as does Gloucester, but Cheltenham just seems to be that little step ahead. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's examples like this, and you saw. Again, my punchline story this week was about the visit of Michael Gove, and I know Michael Gove's not always the most popular character, but what he's had to say about Cheltenham and about Gloucestershire and about the collaboration and the partnership that's bringing about the investment in cyber, the work down at Gloucestershire College, Cynam, Hub 8, Golden Valley. I understand his words were this is an exemplar for the rest of the country, and if only everybody else could be like this. So it's it does take others to come in and say that sort of thing, perhaps to realise actually that we are doing some things right, and there's a real opportunity in a spring in the step. So yeah, it's good.
Thanks very much, David. Right, well, what have you picked out from this week's punchline, please?
Well, actually, David stole my thunder slightly. You may not know I'm Vice Chair of Governors at Gloucestershire College. So Michael Gove coming along and talking about levelling up agenda. I mean, I think the government was probably fairly desperate for a good news story, to be honest. And actually, Gloucestershire was able to provide one. So the levelling up, I think perhaps people don't realise there are pockets of deprivation in and around Gloucestershire, perhaps more than you would imagine. And actually education, I think, is fantastic in terms of levelling up. That's the key to levelling up, I think, education. So the work that Matt and his team does at Gloucestershire College, I think, is amazing. That's why I've got involved with it. And then I was slightly concerned because Emily talked about ground source heat pumps, and that was another story I was going to pick up on related to Gloucestershire College. Did I mention I was Vice Chair of Governors there? Does it not work then? It's millions of pounds we're spending on ground source heat pumps, and Emily, no, it's not going to work. Well, time will tell, no doubt.
Let me know, again, and we'll get them in the cathedral if they work over there.
The point about it is, we are doing something about it, aren't we? We're going to go to net zero as soon as we can. So it's no good just expecting everybody else to fix the problem. Gloucestershire College, again, at the forefront of actually climate change is a problem. We are really doing something about it.
Thanks very much, Will. Emily, what have you picked out this week's punchline?
Yeah, it was a story yesterday about the Royal Agricultural University in Cirencester, and they've set up a Cultural Heritage Institute, actually based over in Swindon. But this is great news, I think, for the sector. They're going to be offering academic and professional practice in things like archaeology, conservation, historic, environmental management. So there's one. We will need help in our plans to get to net zero by 2030, and there's a college that's starting to bring people through on that academic area. So yeah, great story.
And before I move over to Neill to finish off the show, the one other story that I'd just like to mention was My Power. My Power, they won another national award. And of course, My Power, the guys that fitted the solar panels on top of the cathedral, the first cathedral in the UK to actually have solar panels as well. Neill, last story before we wrap up, please. What have you got for us? Diane Savory.
Again, Mark. Diane Savory's appointment and the nuclear fusion at Berkeley, but I was
getting his money's worth out of you, Neill, today.
And then I think the saddest thing that I saw was the 10,000 pubs and restaurants closing as a result of COVID. Tough times still out there, but I also saw a number of shops opening. So I think it is very much about adapting to the circumstances we find ourselves in. And maybe looking at what we're doing and trying to make sure that fits with the environment in which we're working and living.
Thank you very much, guys. The one story that really caught my eye as well was AG Meek in Westgate Street have actually moved over to Eastgate Street in Gloucester as well. It's quite a big story really, because the council is putting £200,000 in from lottery money to safeguard the building, And of course, they're not moving, they're actually reinvesting into the city as well. And yeah, that's a good thing. Another independent staying in the city. Guys, thanks ever so much for my panel this week. Thanks for joining Punchline Talks. Cheerio. Bye.